I want to give you an uncomfortable possibility that the person that you keep labeling as confusing actually possibly has been extremely consistent. It's just we've been living in this created confusion because we don't like what we're seeing. And the problem may be that you're giving more weight to the behavior that supports the outcome you're still hoping for and less weight to the actual behavior that's being seen and the behavior that threatens it. And so in this video, I just want to give you 5 ways you can actually create mixed signals out of information that is actually fairly clear, leading us to created confusion. Okay. And number one, I want to talk about differentiating between affection and intention. Okay. Because everybody is kind of hung up on these ideas that affection equates to intention. Okay. When we define affection, affection is simply attention given. Okay. Whereas intention actually carries a layer of specificity and consistency. Okay. And what we do is we actually kind of conflate the two because we think just because this person is giving us attention, that means they're intentional. Okay. What does it mean? Hey, we got chemistry. Okay. If we were to create a little T chart here and we said on the left was affection. Okay. And on the right was intention. Okay. And so we say, hey, well, we got a lot of chemistry. Okay. Staying up on the phone all night. Okay. Talking on the phone all night. We text all day. Okay. And we're falling in love by the moment. Okay. It's fast replies, it's the memes, it's the TikTok reels, and we're really excited and in this butterfly stage within the relationship. Okay. Whereas intention is actually pretty specific in the things that are experienced and the things that are said. Right. So you might think intention might be, hey, I noticed, okay, that you mentioned that you are convicted about certain music. Right. For example, not saying that has to be the case, but calling it out something tangible and specific. Therefore, I won't actually send you a certain playlist or I won't have you dabble into certain music. Okay. Because we're listening and attentive to what's being said. Maybe there was something caught in the middle of the text messages or phone calls. Maybe instead of it just being about talking on the phone and texting all day, we're actually learning, okay, that we can actually build a future together. Right? We're paying attention to certain thought patterns, certain responses, certain capacities. Okay. This isn't just a manner of butterflies and excitement when we're on the phone, but this is also listening, okay, to the future that's wanted. Right. Not just where do we see each other in 5 years, where do we see each other in 6 years, all the things. I'll zoom in a little bit. Okay. But we're also just talking about how does that incorporate with what we have going on. Okay. Taking up interest into what the other person has going on. Okay. And all the directions and places that you want to be as well as they want to be. Okay. So when we're talking about intentionality, folks, we have to keep in mind that intentionality speaks to the specifics of which is being discussed between two people and applying that in the relationship. Whereas affection is all about the attention, the excitement, okay? And being able to build on this sense of chemistry that seems to be really click because you have similarities, you like the same things, you like the same music, you like this, you like that. But sometimes we get so caught up in the affection that we lose out on the intention. And what you're seeing is that this person is more affectionate, but isn't really as intentional in terms of making out those applications from what you're learning from each other, building on that in the relationship and progressing forward. So we have to be able to differentiate the two if we really want to see this grow in a healthy way. Okay. Here's another area that we can actually create mixed signals. Okay. Because sometimes we just don't know the differences between the two things. And when we do, things start opening up. Okay. Interest and capacity. Okay. Interest versus capacity. If I take up interest in someone, okay, this is actually giving us the ability to see that there are some things that we both like. Okay. It's kind of coming back to the chemistry aspect of things. Okay. There's some things that we both like. There's some direction similarities. Okay. It's taste in music. Okay. Maybe it's food, traveling, all the things that you guys find in mutual desires. Okay. But then when we start talking about capacity, we're no longer just talking about things that we have interest and commonality in. All right. We're actually talking about capacity for things like conflict, repair, okay, solutions, okay, capacity when it comes to listening, right? Availability. How about honesty? We can go on and on. Because what we learn is that capacity has more to do with what somebody has more room for to engage with one another in, right? And noticing that those capacity thresholds can be tested from time to time, season to season, depending on what's being experienced. Whereas the interest more so centers on similarities, things we like, what makes us go, what makes us tick, things that make us laugh, make us smile, right? Again, not to say one it has to be excluded in order for the other to exist, but realize in order for us to differentiate the difference between them having interest and them having capacity is because we all like the same things. It's because we actually are showing that we have what it takes to progress. We have room available. Do I have to switch up where I am and who I am in order to make room for you? In order to make room for where you are, in order to make room for the growth that you're growing into, the progress and process that you're making, right? Because so many times we measure capacity based off of what we both say yes to, what we both agree to. When in reality, capacity has so much more to do with how we handle the events that happen that create different conflicts, different disagreements. How do we actually recover and repair in those moments that allows us to stay connected and build something meaningful moving forward? So even though they have similar interests, you have to ask yourself, is the capacity present for us to actually build something long term? Is there capacity for us to have difficult conversations? Is there capacity for us to be honest? Is there capacity for us to actually not just get along when things are good, but also come together when things are challenging, right? Because that's what we're ultimately wanting to measure to determine if this is as legit as we want it to be. And oftentimes, because we conflate the two or we don't really know how to differentiate them, okay, this is actually something that causes us to believe that because there's interest, that capacity is present. When truth is, you can have similarities in all these things, but this person isn't a good partner. This person isn't a healthy partner because there isn't a development of capacity based on where you are, what you're ready for, and what you need in order for this relationship to make it not just when things are high, but also when seasons are low and things are challenging. Which leads to the third thing that we have to pay attention to that creates confusion, okay, is potential versus pattern. And you've heard this so many times, okay, because when we talk about potential, which is on this left side, okay, pattern, which we'll identify on the right side, when we're thinking about potential, we're thinking about what could be, right? And you have to remember that potential isn't bad, okay? The potential isn't bad. Everybody has potential, but there's a difference between action potential versus staying. Okay. When there's action potential, there's progress. When there's staying potential, we're using words to cover up the progress we're not making actionably, behaviorally. Right. And so even though everybody has potential, there's a ceiling that everybody has the availability to hit in their life. And we're seeing traits in their lives that allows us to feel more confident in their ability to get there. The question becomes, are they willingly putting these things into practice? Are they willingly changing, adjusting, putting in disciplines that allows them to reach this potential? Or is this all based off of what you can make them out to be if they just stay with you? What you can change them to be if they just stayed with you? because then we're banking more on what could be instead of the patterns that actually reveal what is, right? Which has us more geared towards the present, okay? And the behaviors that are happening, okay? So if we were to give some examples, all right, potential, okay, says, they can communicate, or maybe they could communicate if they just dealt with this issue, this trauma, this healing area, right? So if they just handled this one thing, if they did, and we'll just say X, then we would Y. Okay. That's the language of a potential, which pattern, speaks to actually what's happening in real time. And so we're talking about what we notice. I notice this person doesn't apologize, right? I notice the pattern, not just words, but I notice the pattern that this person says they'll correct a behavior, right? And it never changes. And maybe we won't use words like never, but it's not changing, right? We're paying attention to behaviors, not just words. Potential highlights more of what could be said and what could be done. Pattern talks more about what is, the present behaviors, and what's happening. And if we stay looking at patterns, evidence, what we actually have, this is what gives us the ability to actually see the relationship for what it is, not what it could be. And if we get stuck in potential, we'll constantly live in a false reality of the relationship we really have as actually causing us more harm than good. Continuously creating confusion because we're clinging to a version of this person that, in all honesty, doesn't exist. And we have to live in the reality to pay attention to the patterns we see and constantly asking ourselves, if nothing changes, can we live with this? Is this something that we really can deal with? We have the capacity to support, we have the capacity to lean into. Or is this something that is outside of our range and we have to move on? Okay. So again, it's not that the confusion is there. It's just that we're creating it because we're clinging to so many different meanings, so many different sides to the coin that really aren't there. Okay. Which leads us to number 4, which is another good one. And it leads and it carries on one to another: words versus fruit. And you see how all of these simultaneously connect, right? Words versus fruit. Okay. So words. Okay, we're talking about, again, it's not to say that words don't mean anything, but we realize that, you saying one thing and doing something else, two different things, right? We want to find alignment and order. And so, words like sorry, right? That might say and have some level of meaning, but yet your fruit, right? Behavior is unchanging, right? We can say I'm sorry all day, every day, but if your fruit and behavior show that you're not adjusting, you're not catching yourself in those moments, you're not willing to self correct, and you're not willing to adjust to what you keep apologizing for, then what are the sorries, right? Keep your sorries, because it's clear that your behaviors aren't changing, so you don't really mean it. And what's evident that you mean it is what? The behaviors that change, right? And what we really love to differentiate here in this space is that words are not fruit, actions are, right? And so it's one thing to say, it's another thing to do it. Okay, what are the words, right? Like, I promise I'll do better, right? In a relationship, and someone constantly is promising you that they'll do better, okay? Only to repeat offenses and blame, right? Can easily cause us to walk into walls and make us feel like we're running into something that we don't really have any kind of leverage on. We're playing a lose-lose game, right? Words, okay? Like, you're my person, or we'll say future wifey. Sure, you've heard that dialogue before. Okay. All of these identifiers to who you are, early stages in the relationship. Okay. Only to find out that their behavior is showing that there's no commitment, right? They don't want to go into a long-term relationship with you. Okay? They are not willing to connect, to talk. They're too busy for you or the relationship, right? All of these words that on the surface sound good, but because we get so caught up on the words, we don't pay attention to the actions. How this person is not honoring certain expectations, boundaries, and standards you've laid out for the relationship in order for it to work. How this person isn't willing to actually show up, be consistent, be intentional, right? How this person isn't really gracious and kind with their words, right? And it's always about them and how they feel, less about how you feel and where you are. Regardless of how it's important for both people to have room for each other in those spaces, all that's disregarded, right? Because when it comes to them, it's always about them. Okay. And so what we have to do is realize that at the core of all this, words don't equal fruit. That was ugly, but you get it. Okay. Words don't equal fruit, right? Because you can say one thing and your actions say something different. And so we pay attention more to behaviors instead of just words. Okay. Which then leads us to the final understanding that, again, with all of these things, okay, words not being fruit, intention not equaling capacity, potential not equaling patterns, and even as we identified in the beginning, affection is not intention. So, what we have to realize in all of this is that what is really confusing is the version of the person you've created, the relationship you've created, without acknowledging what really is there. Okay. Because sometimes confusion comes from conflicting desire, not conflicting evidence. There's a version of this relationship in this person that you want to see, but it's not matching what is seen. And that's ultimately what's creating the confusion because we're not actually paying attention to the behaviors and we legitimately can count on based on the behaviors we're seeing that is the actual fruit behind what's here. And this is what we have to realize when it comes to addressing a lot of what you call confusion, misleading, all those kinds of things. In reality, oftentimes we could actually be gaslighting ourselves as part of favorite terminologies and buzzwords many people like to use because we're not paying attention to what is, to the consistencies, to the patterns, to what's being shown because it doesn't match what we've created and what we've ultimately molded this person to be in our lives that they just simply haven't reached, therefore doesn't exist. Okay. And discernment requires the courage to let all the evidence count instead of just picking and choosing, being selective, paying attention to what we want over what we need to see. We need to pay attention to it all, take into consideration all of it so we can make the healthiest decision based on what we know and being able to give ourselves grace to update our decision in the event that the decision changes because what we're seeing now is different than what we were seeing before or isn't even close to what was promised when we experienced in the first place. Okay. And if you actually want to know where your discernment really ranks and how to actually build on that, I have a free relational diagnostic in my description in below. So be sure to check that out. It's linked in Becoming Dash Secure. So you want to check that out so you can get your relational diagnostic and move forward from there. And I can't wait to see you in our next video and further breakdowns to help you as the high achieving woman and person you are to build secure relationships that are worth protecting through relational discernment. All right. I can't wait to see you then. Until then, be easy and be breezy. Peace.